How did you get into UC Berkeley and Cambridge University for two masters with your air quote learning disability?
Right. Well, look, there's many dyslexics that have found their way to being big achievers, right? But one example is like, I think, a teacher might assign you to write an essay, and that just seems absolutely overwhelming to me. I mean, especially when it's related to some uh, novel that you just read, it just feels absolutely overwhelming to write this essay based on this novel, and it's just literally feels like you just a deer in the headlights. You just don't know what to do. Often with the challenges of dyslexia, and so what I showed my son, and I made me realize this is what I would do, is that I would go find a whole bunch of sort of facts and conclusions that just were just random and unrelated in some way, and I would just write them down as like little bullet points, like a list of bullet points. And then after that, and once I had this list of bullet points, I would then kind of categorize them. So I had 4 or 5 categories, each with several bullet points. And then from there, I would then turn them into sentences. And then from there, I turn them into paragraphs and write a little introductory sentence, concluding sentence, or transition sentence from each paragraph, until finally you end up with an essay. In a way, what I was doing, I was turning reading and writing into a mathematical exercise. Something that's highly analytical,
Mm.
and it was, it's basically turning this essay writing process into math, essentially, and a form of math. But that's just one example of the types of coping mechanisms I think that someone with dyslexia can come up with. The challenges never went away. So I'll give you an example. When I went to Berkeley for college, I would choose my classes. The way I would choose the classes I could take is I would go into this sort of academic center where they had all the courses listed, and then they also had the syllabus for each course. The reading list. I was terrified of a course that might have several big books of reading, because that would just completely crush me. I just that would just take so much time for me to do, and it would feel nearly impossible. So I would literally just make sure I would do everything I could to avoid those courses by going and doing all my research ahead of time, and selecting the courses that didn't have huge amounts of reading. And instead, I ended up going with a kind of mathematical plan of economics ultimately, and that felt like very surmountable for me and what I was good at.
So I want to quickly provide some education. As you know, we're in the era of peak misinformation and peak disinformation. What really is dyslexia? And since you can't really trust everything you read online, and I know in your interview with Tony Robbins, you said that dyslexic thinking is big picture thinking. So it's a two-part question. Part one, what really is it? And part B, what do you mean by it's a big picture thinking?
Yeah, so I'd like to spend a little bit of time on this because I think this is very, very interesting. So maybe we can break it into a couple questions if you like. I actually even did a little research on this, because one thing that I think is really interesting is that when you're dyslexic, that does not mean that you are an academic expert in dyslexia, right? Obviously, so you can be dyslexic, but it's not like you therefore are able to self-analyze your brain and say, this is how my brain works, and this is what's hard for me, and this is what's easy for me, and here's why. And so, for a long time, I think dyslexics, you just kind of live the way you live, and you know that some things are hard and some things you're good at, but you don't really know why. And this all changed for me actually relatively recently, because I read a fantastic book, which I really want to plug because I just love this book. And I think everyone who suspects they're dyslexic or is a family member who is dyslexic, I would really encourage them to read this book. It was game changing for me, and it's called The Dyslexic Advantage by Brock and Furnett Eide, I think, Eide. And I believe that they come from backgrounds as an educator and a neurologist. And so it's a really fascinating book because it really, really dives into dyslexia. And what really I found it fascinating is it really helps you understand what are the challenges as a dyslexic, and they're more than just reading. That was very eye-opening. And then the second thing is it helps you also understand what your secret superpowers are, what your advantages are. We all understand that dyslexia is a language and reading. We think of it as a reading disorder, the difficulty reading. And its cause comes from the way that the brain processes language and information. And that's important to note that it's not just language, not just reading, but it's language and information. So it's also the processing of information, which includes memory. So that was a big eye-opening thing for me from the book, is that it's not just about the actual phonetical part of reading, but it's also the way that we use our memory to do processing. So what's called working memory. is sometimes watching a whole movie. I don't know if you remember an old movie. There was an old movie called The Usual Suspects, and it was it had quite a complex plot. And I remember coming out of that movie in the theater and just having no idea what happened in this movie. And all my friends understood it. It was a complex plot, but that's an example of where dyslexic can be challenged because of the way we process information. Even watching a complicated movie with a very complicated plot can be challenging, and you can feel very, very confused. Obviously, some famous people that are dyslexic: Richard Branson, the creator of the Virgin Group, the founder of IKEA, the founder of Charles Schwab, the founder of AT&T Wireless, which was called Macaw Cellular, Henry Ford, Ted Turner,
Wow.
Walt Disney, Gavin Newsom, Leonardo da Vinci. All these people were dyslexic, which I think is just, so inspiring. Dyslexics, they're challenged, right? They're challenged really by three main things. They're challenged by interpreting letters and sounds. They're challenged by interpreting then words and the meanings, stringing these words, stringing these sounds together to create words, which feels like assembling a puzzle where the pieces don't fit.
So, are you able to use your categorization approach even onto like movies and other informations beyond writing essay, and like categorize into like deconstructing? Like, does that approach work for most information processing?
Yeah, I mean the answer is basically yes, you can use it, but like you would literally, like, one way you use it is that, like, when I watch movies like on a streaming thing, I'll often like rewind and rewatch things. So sometimes you need a different set of tools. This is why dyslexics can thrive when they're given sort of what are called accommodations. And my son has an individualized education program at school, and he's given, like many dyslexics, they're given extra time to do tests. And with that extra time, you can start to use these other methods, because your intelligence is not suffering when you have dyslexia. It's just that you need to use other systems basically to be able to do the work. And those things often take time. So you might need to like listen to things rather than read things, watch videos. You might need to take notes. Now, clearly that, it's a lot more labor intensive to do that than just simply reading it as most people would do. But with the extra time and about applying these structured organization methods that are similar to the compartmentalized system that we talked about with bullet points, yeah, you can find coping mechanisms basically.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That explains why the work ethics are pronounced with all the great, like, right, Richard Branson, all these people have great work ethics because the labor intensive nature of your diagnosis. It makes sense. By like overcoming that, you have to have impeccable work ethics. But please go back to the superpowers and competitive advantage, so to speak, because there's a lot of exciting new research about ADHD as well. Like people with ADHD has increased lateral thinking, convergent thinking, divergent thinking, and it has huge boost in a domain of creativity. So what are the superpowers you've been hinting at?
Yeah, okay. So really, I'm going to list out kind of the main superpowers really. So one is creativity. Another one is problem solving skills. And so it's not to say that, that other people don't have creativity. It's just that dyslexics can have sort of enhanced capabilities of creativity, enhanced capabilities in problem solving, enhanced capabilities in spatial reasoning, and enhanced capabilities in it's called what we think of as intuitive thinking, and then finally an enhanced sort of empathy and emotional intelligence in certain ways. Those would be the main thing. And actually, there's one additional one that's not, I don't think of as being an inherent advantage of the brain itself, but it's more of a result of the experience of being dyslexic. It can be an enhanced adaptability and resilience. And that really comes from the fact that, as a dyslexic, in all those formative years of your childhood, you're facing so many challenges and setbacks, and you just can't understand why you're struggling with basic things. It makes you feel really dumb, frankly. And because you have to just work so hard to overcome them, find these coping mechanisms, and deal with the fact that you're frankly failing on what often seem like basic tasks compared to non-dyslexics, over time you sort of foster this kind of resilience and adaptability that comes with having survived all that. It allows you to be less likely to be discouraged by obstacles, more likely to view kind of failures as learning opportunities, and just have a higher tolerance for risk, because you can sort of, you've learned to kind of play out all the different possibilities, and envisioning the different possibilities as you calculate your risk and reward.